Hey everyone, I'm Mariana, and now that we are definitely done with 2019, it is time for me to look back at my year of reading and tell you all about the best and the worst books that I read last year. You guys seem to really enjoy what I did last year for my 2018 best and worst books video, so this year, once again, instead of doing a regular top 10, I broke this down into 10 categories plus a few extra mentions for all of the books that stood out to me the most. As always, everything I talk about, as well as videos featuring any of the books I mention, are going to be listed in the info box below, so don't forget to check that out, and let's get into the books. Let's start with the best 2019 release. If you've been following my reading adventures, you know that I actually ended up reading quite a few new releases last year, but the best one of them would have to be Miracle Creek by Angie Kim. This procedural dramatic thriller swept me off my feet and not only kept me guessing for most of the novel, but also made me think about a lot of things I haven't considered before. It's a gripping story, it's thought-provoking, it has great characters, it tackles a lot of difficult topics that have to do with parenthood, family, community, immigration, starting over, a lot of stuff, and it is really unlike anything I've read before. I cannot recommend this enough. If you're going to check out one new release from 2019, I think you should make it Miracle Creek. As for the worst 2019 release I've read, I am going to have to go with Inspection by Josh Malerman. I was actually really excited to read this one because I loved Bird Box, also written by Josh Malerman. But unfortunately, Inspection was just a whole lot of no for me. This is being sold as a coming-of-age thriller, and it involves this bizarre school where, among other strange things, kids are given letters instead of names. And you're generally kept in the dark about the reasoning for pretty much anything most of the time. It bothers me when, in a story, the main source of suspense is withholding information. That is just lazy writing for me. But aside from that, I just found this novel pretty ridiculous, sometimes unintentionally funny, with very bland characters and leading pretty much nowhere. Sorry, I really hated this book. I kind of want my time back. Next up, my favorite classic. This was one of the easiest categories for me because this book happens to be just generally my favorite book of the year overall, and I am talking about Roadside Picnic by Boris and Arkady Strugatsky. To say that this gritty sci-fi classic blew me away is an understatement. I just could not get over this book after I finished it. I kept thinking about it, I reread part 4 twice, I kept wanting to discuss it with everyone. This was a reading experience and an ending that really got to me. It was one of those rare books that I really felt like had a big impact on me and my worldview. I was, for lack of a better word, shook. Not just for days, but for weeks after finishing Roadside Picnic. This is absolutely something that I would read again, and I cannot wait to read more works from the Strugatsky brothers. This copy I'm holding is obviously in Russian, which is how I read it, but I did take a look at the English translation, and it is actually pretty good, so don't be afraid to pick up translated fiction. The newer English translation is pretty spot on. My favorite book series of last year has to be the Winternight Trilogy by Catherine Arden. This one almost went to Neal Shusterman and Arc of Scythe, but I just have to give this one to Catherine Arden because the Winternight Trilogy was so consistently good. I'm only holding up the first book because they're all up there and I don't want to destroy my shelves completely, but also it's easier to hold up one book. I love the way the author blended historical elements and Slavic mythology in this one. While on its surface, this may seem like your typical special girl shakes up the world type of fantasy premise, these books really stand out because of the characters and the world building, and I was really impressed by what Catherine Arden was able to accomplish here. I really felt like she improved and expanded on the story story and the world with every novel. Even though this is technically young adult fantasy, it is not too light, which is an issue I often have with YA fantasy. These books even have some creepy moments, and the author is not afraid to occasionally go dark, which is very consistent with Slavic folklore fairy tales. They are filled with magic and mythology and magical creatures, and I just loved them. The biggest surprise of the year for me was Vengeful by V.E. Schwab. This is a sequel to Vicious, and I am a big fan of Vicious. I loved it. I loved the ending. And so when I heard there was a sequel coming out, I was very skeptical and I felt like it was completely unnecessary. I was wrong. What's great about Vengeful is that it is a true companion piece to Vicious, where the first book was more focused on Victor. Here we get to find out more about Eli, which makes you understand his character a lot better. Of course, we get to hang out with a bunch of familiar characters from the first book, but we also get a really fun and powerful new villain. She is pretty amazing, and naturally there's plenty of action to keep the readers glued to this novel. Basically, if you enjoyed Vicious and like me, you are doubting the necessity of this sequel, trust me, this is the sequel you did not know you needed. And I cannot believe I'm saying this, but I am actually very excited for the possibility of there being a book 3. I would love to read another one. Now, the biggest disappointment of the year for me was, brace yourselves, The Institute by Stephen King. I don't even know where to start with that one. I was very excited for this novel. It's about a secret facility where kidnapped kids with special abilities such as telekinesis and telepathy are studied and kind of kept under very strict rules. It promised to be this dramatic story of good versus evil. I was ready to love this book. But guys, this is so derivative. I don't want to spoil it for anyone who is interested in reading this novel, but there were 3 very specific other fictional stories that came to mind when I was reading it, and there were elements that were very much clearly from those stories. And I swear, almost every overdone trope that you can think of in relation to this premise is present in this book. Not to mention, the kids in this novel sound like they are at the very least from half a century ago, because no modern child or teenager in the US sounds like these kids. It's just not a thing. But then King tries to cover this up with these forced and awkward pop culture references, and they're just not helpful because they are definitely forced. I could rant about this book for a very long time, so I'm just going to stop myself there, but I cannot believe how many 4 and 5-star ratings this has on Goodreads. The average rating is like 4.2 out of 5. How? I don't understand. And I don't understand why I see so many people say that this is as good as his older novels that stood the test of time. Just no. All right, let's bring this down with the most thought-provoking book I've read in 2019, and that is technically Roadside Picnic, but I don't want to repeat myself on this list, so I'm going with the runner-up, and that is The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. This novel stayed with me in a way I did not expect. I even ended up changing my rating to a higher one a couple of weeks after I read it, which doesn't happen often at all, because I realized how much the themes actually resonated with me. This is a novel for people who enjoy soul-searching. It is definitely a slow burn, but it is never boring. It's introverted and melancholic. It deals with finding yourself after a life-altering event, finding what you believe in, and just with general human and personal values. You guys know how much I love a good introspective book that is all about a character's journey, and this is definitely one of those. So if that's something you enjoy and you haven't read The Goldfinch and you're kind of terrified by how long it is so worth it. The most overhyped book of the year for me, now brace yourselves for another unpopular opinion, this one might hurt, It's The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I am not saying that I didn't like this book, because I did, but I had such absurdly high expectations based on so many people hyping it up ridiculously that when I read it, I just felt like it was fine. I am honestly not sure why almost everyone I've seen talk about this book was so blown away by it when it pretty much unfolded exactly the way you would expect. I am also not sure why this is being categorized primarily as historical fiction when this is basically a melodramatic love story, though I guess you could make that case because of the setting. What I'm saying is that I expected a lot more from this novel after seeing so many rave reviews and hearing people say that this is a must-read over and over again. I wanted more depth. I wanted there to be more to it than the question of who was the love of Evelyn's life. I wanted to stop feeling like I'm watching an early 2000s episode of E! True Hollywood Story. Comment below if you remember watching that on TV. I did like the novel despite being underwhelmed by it. I eventually warmed up to the characters and cared about what happened to them, and I do really enjoy Reid's writing, but honestly, I just liked Daisy Jones and the Six a lot more. My favorite nonfiction book, now that everyone disliked this video and unsubscribed from my channel after my rants on Stephen King and Taylor Jenkins Reid, which is pretty much a no-no on YouTube. My favorite nonfiction is The Unwomanly Face of War by Svetlana Alexievich. Now, this is the book that is a must-read despite of how horrifying it is. And yes, I'm once again holding up a Russian edition of it because it is originally written in Russian, so that's how I read it. But there is an English translation, and it is once again pretty good. Just like her other books, this is an oral history told through interviews with many different people. This time, Alexievich gives a voice to women who fought in World War II, a perspective we don't often see. This is unlike any World War II book I have ever read, and yes, it is at times difficult to get through because of the things these people witnessed. What's even harder to process is that many of these heroic women returned home only to be treated with disdain because they were seen as unworthy and ruined by war. It is just so heartbreaking. Basically, if you want to get emotionally decimated by some raw personal stories, this is a book for you. Finally, the most beautifully written book of the year for me was The Immortalists by Chloe Benjamin. I feel like this book is not appreciated as much as it should be because the premise makes it sound a lot more mysterious and potentially even slightly magical, when in reality, that's not how it actually is, and it sets up wrong expectations. This book is a wonderful character study of 4 siblings that get their exact dates of death from a fortune teller, and the novel examines how this knowledge affects their lives and explores the idea of fate versus free will. First of all, I loved the way this was structured. The novel changes perspectives every time a sibling dies, but the overall chronology of it stays the same. It is the same timeline, but from different points of view at different times, which I thought was really cool. Second, of course, the writing is absolutely gorgeous, and Chloe Benjamin writes each sibling so distinctly. It is just such great character work combined with great writing. I thought it was masterfully done. You really get a sense of how different each of the siblings are, and I just loved that. If you enjoy character-driven stories, particularly those that tackle questions of mortality and fate, I really think you need to give The Immortalists a try. To finish things off, I have a few more books that I really loved, but I really didn't feel like they needed separate categories, so here are the best of the rest. The best crime thriller I read was The Whisperman by Alex North, and I have talked about this book on multiple occasions. I'm not going to repeat myself. I'm sure you're sick of hearing me talking about it, but it was such a good crime thriller with really great characters. The best short story collection I read was Exhalation by Ted Chiang. I discovered Ted Chiang for myself this year. He is such a wonderful sci-fi writer. I also read Stories of Your Life and Others by him this year, but I think I liked Exhalation a little bit more. And these stories really inspired me to look for more sci-fi, and I'm definitely making it my goal for 2020 to read even more sci-fi. I read a lot of good sci-fi in 2019, but we're stepping it up in 2020. So if you're looking for some excellent science fiction short stories, those two collections are really, really good. Finally, the best reread of the year, which is something I make a point of doing, rereading at least a few favorites, / my favorite King novel of the year, because I have read like 6 of them or something like that. I've lost count in 2019. And that has to be The Shining. It's a classic. I loved it for a reason. It was one of the first Stephen King novels I read, and it is still one of my favorites. It is so good, and it is so much fun to read again because you pick up on so many different things that you don't notice the first time around. Highly suggest rereading this one in contrast to, The Institute. And that's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I would love to know what were the best and the worst books that you read in 2019. So let me know in the comments below. Do we have any similar choices? Do we have any opposite choices? I have a feeling we do. Yeah, let's talk in the comments. As always, a very special thank you to everyone who is supporting me on Patreon. I really appreciate all of you guys, and a very extra special thank you to the patrons whose names are on the screen right now. I hope everyone who watched this video enjoyed it, and if you guys did, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, comment below, share it with your friends, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. I will see you very soon in my next video. Bye.